Chapter 38 of Sylvia's Lovers by Elizabeth Gaskell. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Read by Terence Callan. Chapter 38, The Recognition. Far away over sea and land, over sunny sea again, great guns were booming on that 7th of May, 1799. The Mediterranean came up with a long roar on a beach glittering white with snowy sand, and the fragments of innumerable seashells, delicate and shining as porcelain. Looking at that shore from the sea, a long ridge of upland ground, beginning from an inland depth, stretched far away into the ocean on the right, till it ended in a great mountainous bluff, crowned with the white buildings of a convent, sloping rapidly down into the blue water at its base. In the clear eastern air, the different characters of the foliage that clothed the sides of that sea-washed mountain might be discerned from a long distance by the naked eye: the silver gray of the olive trees near its summit, the heavy green and bossy forms of the sycamores lower down, broken here and there by a solitary terebinth or ilex tree of a deeper green and a wider spread, till the eye fell below on the maritime plain, edged with the white seaboard and the sandy hillocks, with here and there feathery palm trees, either isolated or in groups, motionless and distinct against the hot purple air. Look again, a little to the left on the seashore, there are the white walls of a fortified town, glittering in sunlight or black in shadow. The fortifications themselves run out into the sea, forming a port and a haven against the wild Levantine storms, and a lighthouse rises out of the waves to guide mariners into safety. Beyond this walled city, and far away to the left still, there is the same wide plain shut in by the distant rising ground, till the upland circuit comes closing in to the north, and the great white rocks meet the deep, tideless ocean with its intensity of blue color. Above, the sky is literally purple with heat, and the pitiless light smites the gazer's weary eye as it comes back from the white shore. Nor does the plain country in that land offer the refuge and rest of our own soft green. The limestone rock underlies the vegetation and gives a glittering ashen hue to all the bare patches, and even to the cultivated parts which are burnt up early in the year. In springtime alone does the country look rich and fruitful. Then the cornfields of the plain show their capability of bearing, some 50, some 100-fold, down by the brook Kishon, flowing not far from the base of the mountainous promontory to the south. There grow the broad green fig trees, cool and fresh to look upon. The orchards are full of glossy-leaved cherry trees. The tall amaryllis puts forth crimson and yellow glories in the fields, rivaling the pomp of King Solomon. The daisies and the hyacinths spread their myriad flowers. The anemones, scarlet as blood, run hither and thither over the ground like dazzling flames of fire. A spicy odor lingers in the heated air. It comes from the multitude of aromatic flowers that blossom in the early spring. Later on they will have withered and faded, and the corn will have been gathered, and the deep green of the eastern foliage will have assumed a kind of gray-bleached tint. Even now in May, the hot sparkle of the everlasting sea, the terribly clear outline of all objects, whether near or distant, the fierce sun right overhead, the dazzling air around, were inexpressibly wearying to the English eyes that kept their skilled watch day and night on the strongly fortified coast town that lay out a little to the northward of where the British ships were anchored. They had kept up a flanking fire for many days in aid of those besieged in Saint-Jean-d'Acre, and at intervals had listened, impatient, to the sound of the heavy siege guns or the sharper rattle of the French musketry. In the morning on the 7th of May, a man at the masthead of the Tigre sang out that he saw ships in the offing, and in reply to the signal that was hastily run up, he saw the distant vessels hoist friendly flags. That May morning was a busy time. The besieged Turks took heart of grace. The French outside, under the command of their great general, made hasty preparations for a more vigorous assault than all many, both vigorous and bloody, that had gone before, for the siege was now at its 51st day, in hopes of carrying the town by storm before the reinforcement coming by sea could arrive. And Sir Sidney Smith, aware of Bonaparte's desperate intention, ordered all the men, both sailors and marines, that could be spared from the necessity of keeping up a continual flanking fire from the ships upon the French, to land and assist the Turks and the British forces already there in the defense of the old historic city. Lieutenant Kinraid, who had shared his captain's daring adventure off the coast of France 3 years before, who had been a prisoner with him and Wesley Wright in the Temple at Paris, and had escaped with them, and through Sir Sidney's earnest recommendation, been promoted from being a warrant officer to the rank of lieutenant, received on this day the honor from his admiral of being appointed to an especial post of danger. His heart was like a war horse, and said, "Ha ha," as the boat bounded over the waves that were to land him under the ancient machicolated walls where the Crusaders made their last stand in the Holy Land. Not that Kinraid knew or cared one jot about those gallant knights of old. All he knew was that the French, under Boney, were trying to take the town from the Turks, and that his admiral said they must not, and so they should not. He and his men landed on that sandy shore and entered the town by the Waterport gate. He was singing to himself his own country song, "Weel may the keel row, etc., and his men, with sailors' aptitude for music, caught up the air and joined in the burden with inarticulate sounds. So with merry hearts they threaded the narrow streets of Acre, hemmed in on either side by the white walls of Turkish houses, with small grated openings high up, above all chance of peeping intrusion. Here and there they met an ample-robed and turbaned Turk, going along with as much haste as his stately self-possession would allow, but the majority of the male inhabitants were gathered together to defend the breach, where the French guns thundered out far above the heads of the sailors. They went along none the less merrily for the sound to Djerar Pasha's garden, where the old Turk sate on his carpet beneath the shade of a great terebinth tree, listening to the interpreter, who made known to him the meaning of the eager speeches of Sir Sidney Smith and the colonel of the Marines. As soon as the admiral saw the gallant sailors of HMS Tigre, he interrupted the council of war without much ceremony, and going to Kinraid, he dispatched them, as before arranged, to the North Ravelin, showing them the way with rapid, clear directions. Out of respect to him, they had kept silent while in the strange, desolate garden, but once more in the streets, the old Newcastle song rose up again till the men were, perforce, silenced by the haste with which they went to the post of danger. It was 3 o'clock in the afternoon. For many a day these very men had been swearing at the terrific heat at this hour, even when at sea, fanned by the soft breeze, but now in the midst of hot smoke, with former carnage tainting the air, and with the rush and whiz of death perpetually whistling in their ears, they were uncomplaining and light-hearted. Many an old joke and some new ones came brave and hearty on their cheerful voices, even though the speaker was veiled from sight in great clouds of smoke, cloven only by the bright flames of death. A sudden message came, as many of the crew of the Tigre as were under Lieutenant Kinraid's command were to go down to the mole to assist the new reinforcements, seen by the sailor from the masthead at day-dawn, under command of Hassan Bey, to land at the mole, where Sir Sidney then was. Off they went, almost as bright and thoughtless as before, though 2 of their number lay silent forever at the North Ravelin, silenced in that one little half-hour. and one went along with the rest, swearing lustily at his ill luck in having his right arm broken, but ready to do good business with his left. They helped the Turkish troops to land more with good will than tenderness, and then, led by Sir Sidney, they went under the shelter of English guns to the fatal breach, so often assailed, so gallantly defended, but never so fiercely contested as on this burning afternoon. The ruins of the massive wall that here had been broken down by the French were used by them as stepping stones to get on a level with the besieged, and so to escape the heavy stones which the latter hurled down. Nay, even the dead bodies of the morning's comrades were made into ghastly stairs. When Djezzar Pasha heard that the British sailors were defending the breach, headed by Sir Sidney Smith, he left his station in the palace garden, gathered up his robes in haste, and hurried to the breach, where with his own hands and with right hearty good will he pulled the sailors down from the post of danger, saying that if he lost his English friends, he lost all. But little recked the crew of the Tigre of the one old man, Pasha or otherwise, who tried to hold them back from the fight. They were up and at the French assailants, clambering over the breach in an instant, and so they went on as if it were some game at play instead of a deadly combat, until Kinraid and his men were called off by Sir Sidney, as the reinforcement of Turkish troops under Hassan Bey were now sufficient for the defense of that old breach in the walls, which was no longer the principal object of the French attack, for the besiegers had made a new and more formidable breach by their incessant fire, knocking down whole streets of the city walls. "Fight your best, Kinraid," said Sir Sidney, "for there's Boney on yonder hill looking at you." And sure enough, on a rising ground called Richard Coeur de Lion's Mount, there was a half-circle of French generals on horseback, all deferentially attending to the motions and apparently to the words of a little man in their center, at whose bidding the aide-de-camp galloped swift with messages to the more distant French camp. The two ravelins which Kinraid and his men had to occupy for the purpose of sending a flanking fire upon the enemy were not 10 yards from that enemy's van. But at length there was a sudden rush of the French to that part of the wall where they imagined they could enter unopposed. Surprised at this movement, Kinraid ventured out of the shelter of the ravelin to ascertain the cause. He, safe and untouched during that long afternoon of carnage, fell now under a stray musket shot, and lay helpless and exposed upon the ground, undiscerned by his men, who were recalled to help in the hot reception which had been planned for the French, who, descending the city walls into the Pasha's garden, were attacked with saber and dagger, and lay headless corpses under the flowering rose bushes and by the fountain side. Kinraid lay beyond the ravelins, many yards outside the city walls. He was utterly helpless, for the shot had broken his leg. Dead bodies of Frenchmen lay strewn around him. No Englishman had ventured out so far. All the wounded men that he could see were French, and many of these, furious with pain, gnashed their teeth at him and cursed him aloud, till he thought that his best course was to assume the semblance of death, for some among these men were still capable of dragging themselves up to him, and by concentrating all their failing energies into one blow, put him to a speedy end. The outlying pickets of the French army were within easy rifle shot, and his uniform, although less conspicuous in color than that of the Marines, by whose sides he had been fighting, would make him a sure mark if he so much as moved his arm. Yet how he longed to turn, if ever so slightly, so that the cruel slanting sun might not beat full into his aching eyes. Fever, too, was coming upon him. The pain in his leg was every moment growing more severe. The terrible thirst of the wounded, added to the heat and fatigue of the day, made his lips and tongue feel baked and dry, and his whole throat seemed parched and wooden. Thoughts of other days, of cool Greenland seas where ice abounded, of grassy English homes, began to make the past more real than the present. With a great effort he brought his wandering senses back. He knew where he was now, and could weigh the chances of his life, which were but small. The unwonted tears came to his eyes as he thought of the newly made wife in her English home, who might never know how he died thinking of her. Suddenly he saw a party of English Marines advance, under shelter of the ravelin, to pick up the wounded and bear them within the walls for surgical help. They were so near he could see their faces, could hear them speak, yet he durst not make any sign to them when he lay within range of the French pickets' fire. For one moment he could not resist raising his head to give himself a chance for life, before the unclean creatures that infest a camp came round in the darkness of the night to strip and insult the dead bodies, and to put to death such as had yet the breath of life within them. But the setting sun came full into his face, and he saw nothing of what he longed to see. He fell back in despair. He lay there to die. That strong, clear sunbeam had wrought his salvation. He had been recognized as men are recognized when they stand in the red glare of a house on fire. The same despair of help, of hopeless farewell to life, stamped on their faces in blood-red light. One man left his fellows and came running forwards in among the enemy's wounded, within range of their guns. He bent down over Kinraid. He seemed to understand without a word. He lifted him up, carrying him like a child, and with the vehement energy that is more from the force of will than the strength of body, he bore him back to within the shelter of the ravelin, not without many shots being aimed at them, one of which hit Kinraid in the fleshy part of his arm. Kinraid was racked with agony from his dangling broken leg, and his very life seemed leaving him. Yet he remembered afterwards how the Marine recalled his fellows, and how in the pause before they returned, his face became like one formerly known to the sick senses of Kinraid. Yet it was too like a dream, too utterly improbable to be real. Yet the few words this man said as he stood breathless and alone by the fainting Kinraid fitted in well with the belief conjured up by his personal appearance. He panted out, "I niver thought you'd a kept true to her." And then the others came up, and while they were making a sling of their belts, Kinraid fainted utterly away, and the next time that he was fully conscious, he was lying in his berth in the Tigray with the ship's surgeon setting his leg. After that he was too feverish for several days to collect his senses. When he could first remember and form a judgment upon his recollections, he called the man especially charged to attend upon him, and bade him go and make inquiry in every possible manner for a Marine named Philip Hepburn, and when he was found, to entreat him to come and see Kinraid. The sailor was away the greater part of the day, and returned unsuccessful in his search. He had been from ship to ship, hither and thither. He had questioned all the Marines he had met with. No one knew anything of any Philip Hepburn. Kinraid passed a miserably feverish night, and when the doctor exclaimed the next morning at his retrogression, he told him with some irritation of the ill success of his servant. He accused the man of stupidity, and wished fervently that he were able to go himself. Partly to soothe him, the doctor promised that he would undertake the search for Hepburn, and he engaged faithfully to follow all Kinraid's eager directions, not to be satisfied with men's careless words, but to look over muster rolls and ship's books. He, too, brought the same answer, however unwillingly given. He had set out upon the search so confident of success that he felt doubly discomfited by failure. However, he had persuaded himself that the lieutenant had been partially delirious from the effects of his wound, and the power of the sun shining down just where he lay. There had indeed been slight symptoms of Kinraid's having received a sunstroke, and the doctor dwelt largely on these in his endeavor to persuade his patient that it was his imagination which had endued a stranger with the lineaments of some former friend. Kinraid threw his arms out of bed with impatience at all this plausible talk, which was even more irritating than the fact that Hepburn was still undiscovered. The man was no friend of mine. I was like to have killed him when last I saw him. He was a shopkeeper in a country town in England. I had seen little enough of him, but enough to make me able to swear to him anywhere, even in a Marine's uniform and in this sweltering country. Faces once seen, especially in excitement, are apt to return upon the memory in cases of fever, quoth the doctor, sententiously. The attendant sailor, reinstalled to some complacency by the failure of another in the search in which he himself had been unsuccessful, now put in his explanation. Maybe it was a spirit. It's not the first time as I've heard of a spirit coming upon earth to save a man's life in time of need. My father had an uncle, a west country grazier. He was a-coming over Dartmoor in Devonshire one moonlight night with a power o' money as he'd got for his sheep at the fair. It were stowed in leather bags under the seat of the gig. It were a rough kind of road, both as a road and in character, for there'd been many robberies there of late, and the great rocks stood convenient for hiding places. All at once father's uncle feels as if someone were sitting beside him on the empty seat, and he turns his head and looks, and there he sees his brother sitting, his brother as had been dead 12 year and more. So he turns his head back again, eyes right, and never say a word, but wonders what it all means. All of a sudden 2 fellows come out upon the white road from some black shadow, and they look and they let the gig go past, father's uncle driving hard, I'll warrant him. But for all that he heard one say t'other, "By, there's 2 on 'em." Straight on he drove faster than ever, till he saw the far lights of some town or other. I forget its name, though I've heard it many a time. And then he drew a long breath and turned his head to look at his brother and ask him how he'd managed to come out of his grave in Barham churchyard, and the seat was as empty as it had been when he set out. And then he knew that it were a spirit come to help him against the men who thought to rob him, and would likely enough have murdered him. Kinraid had kept quiet through this story, but when the sailor began to draw the moral and to say, "And I think I may make bold to say, sir, as the Marine who carried you out of the Frenchie's gunshot was just a spirit come to help you," he exclaimed impatiently, swearing a great oath as he did so, "It was no spirit, I tell you, and I was in my full senses. It was a man named Philip Hepburn. He said words to me or over me as none but himself would have said. Yet we hated each other like poison, and I can't make out why he should be there and putting himself in danger to save me. But so it was, and as you can't find him, let me hear no more of your nonsense. It was him and not my fancy, doctor. It was flesh and blood and not a spirit, Jack. So get along with you and leave me quiet." All this time Stephen Freeman lay friendless, sick, and shattered on board the Theseus. He had been about his duty close to some shells that were placed on her deck. A gay young midshipman was thoughtlessly striving to get the fusee out of one of these by a mallet and spike nail that lay close at hand, and a fearful explosion ensued, in which the poor marine, cleaning his bayonet near, was shockingly burnt and disfigured, the very skin of all the lower part of his face being utterly destroyed by gunpowder. They said it was a mercy that his eyes were spared, but he could hardly feel anything to be a mercy, as he lay tossing in agony, burnt by the explosion, wounded by splinters, and feeling that he was disabled for life, if life itself were preserved. Of all that suffered by that fearful accident, and there were many, none was so forsaken, so hopeless, so desolate, as the Philip Hepburn about whom such anxious inquiries were being made at that very time. End of chapter 38.